Hey there, I'm David Schloss, Editor-in-Chief of Digital Photo Pro in the Armory in New York City today for the launch of the Sony A9. Sony announced this camera yesterday. This is our first look. We're going to have a more in-depth look. We've been playing with the camera for 2 days now. It's an incredibly impressive camera. Sony made a lot of promises, so I want to talk a little bit about their promises and whether or not this camera delivers on them. So the Sony A9 is a 20 megapixel camera with a new stacked CMOS sensor. And the stacked CMOS sensor gives the camera an incredibly fast processing time, both in terms of autofocus and in terms of the buffer and the write times to cards. So with that 20 megapixel sensor, this camera is able to shoot at 20 frames per second using a silent electronic shutter, which I'll get back to in a minute. It has a buffer for JPEG of a little bit over 700 images. It has a buffer for RAW of a little bit over 200 images. 20 frames a second, 700 images, that is a heck of a burst. I've been shooting it in the RAW plus JPEG. It's completely keeping up with everything that I do. In fact, when I was a sports photographer, this is a camera that I probably literally would have killed somebody to have. Most electronic shutter cameras have a problem called rolling shutter, and rolling shutter simply means that as the camera reads the information off of the sensor, there's changes to what's happening in the scene by the time that that frame is being read. So what happens is as your subject is moving and the information is being read, your subject doesn't line up completely at the top or the bottom because the subject's moved in the amount of time it's taken to read that information. Sony has solved that with what's called a stacked CMOS sensor. They basically put the wiring and the memory directly onto the sensor so that it can read the sensor out much more quickly. That, of course, is Sony's claim about the camera. That's what we've been testing. Now, Sony has been talking about the A9 camera as a camera with a silent shutter. The idea is that the camera is an electronic shutter first, but there's also a mechanical shutter that you can use if you don't want to use the electronic shutter. We've been testing this for 2 days, and it has really been living up to the hype that Sony gave at the launch. In fact, it's been living up to the hype that they gave with the A6500, which was also supposed to have incredible autofocus performance and electronic shutter, but we didn't really feel that the A6500 delivered on a lot of those promises. The Sony A9 delivers on those promises. In our testing of the autofocus system in the A9, it is a world better than the A7 series cameras. The A7 had good autofocus. Top-end DSLRs were still better than the autofocus in the A7 system. The autofocus in the A9 camera rivals just about anything we've used so far. So Sony's been talking about a lot of opportunities for shooting where a silent shutter would be really useful. Shooting at the press corps, shooting at funerals, shooting in the military situations, shooting wildlife, all those things would really benefit from having a shutter that makes no noise. In fact, when we show tests of the shutter in operation, we've been leaving it in a mode where the camera is making a noise just so you can feel like there's a shutter noise, but it doesn't need that at all. You can also turn on a visual indicator, so if you have the audio off, you can still see a little flashing black lines inside the camera when it's capturing pictures, but then you know when the shutter's been triggering. One of the reasons that's important is because the 120 frame a second electronic viewfinder inside the Sony A9 has no blackout. So you can shoot your full burst at 20 frames a second. There is no blackout in the electronic viewfinder. This may not seem impressive, but it is an incredibly different way to shoot. In fact, one of the photographers, David Burnett, was talking about how for the first time with photography, you're actually seeing the picture that you're taking when you take it. Because normally with a camera like an SLR or even mirrorless cameras with a mechanical shutter, when you're pressing the button, you have a blackout. You don't actually see the moment that you're capturing until you go back and take a look at it. With the electronic shutter, you can actually watch what's going on and see if the action was captured. It's an incredible way to shoot. Over the last couple of years, we've been at a number of Sony events, and at every one of the events, Sony has sent out engineers to sit and talk to us about things that we would like to see changed about the camera. Sony has addressed the majority of those in a camera that also manages to keep the same form factor as the A7 series camera. So there's a dual SD card slot. It uses the new UHS-2 SD cards. You can record to both of them. You can put JPEG on one, RAW on another. There's a new battery in the camera. It is their Z-class battery. The battery is about twice the capacity of the previous battery. There will be an accessory grip for the A9 camera, which will allow you to put 2 batteries in the camera. There are a ton of other features. They've redesigned the top of the camera so that there's a dedicated selector for your focus mode. There's also a dial at the top for your focus capture speed, so you can do a high, medium, and low right here on the camera. You don't have to jump inside the camera to change any of the settings. There's a couple of other great features as well. There's a joystick on the back of the camera, and if you've seen me talk about any of my camera reviews recently, I feel that every professional level camera should have a joystick on the back for doing focus select. One of the great things you can do with this camera is that you can set a focus point as a holding sort of focus point and jump back to that focus point at any time that you want. So you can set the camera on something like the wide focus, where the camera's got 93% of the sensor coverage, more than 600 focus points, and then you can push a button and the focus will jump to being a small point in, say, the upper right-hand corner. A couple other nice things: the Play Memories app now works with a Bluetooth connectivity mode in the camera, so that you can have the geotagging in the camera based on the GPS location on your phone. It will also update the time and date stamps in the images XF data to what the GPS camera says, which is great because if you're shooting with a couple different cameras, now it keeps it completely accurate across cameras. The card slot has gotten an upgrade. There's now a little switch to open up the card slot. The movie button has moved over to the back near the viewfinder. It's much easier to use. Now, there's a couple of things that Sony still has that are pain points in the camera. They know this. I'll point some of them out. The menu system is still as complicated as it's ever been. In fact, they've added more features in order to control a lot of the functionality of the camera. Some things that you used to know where it is are now in different menus. They have added page numbers to the top of the menus, and so if you need to look up something, you can see that something's under the first camera control, the fourth page or something like that. Really, we still need a better menu system on the Sony cameras. I hope that's coming in the future. Another thing is weather sealing. I've heard that the camera is slightly better weather sealed than the A7 camera. I have not gotten a confirmation about that. I still would not take the camera out in the same inclement weather that I would take the Nikon D5 or the Canon 1DX Mark II in. Weather sealing is something that's going to have to come down the road. To their credit, though, during the press conference, Sony did say that they know that there's still some issues with the camera. They're going to be working on those going forward. It's nice to have a company that's actually listening to feature requests. The Sony A9 will be about $4,500 in the United States. I've heard people on both sides of the fence about this pricing. Some people have been really excited about the pricing. Some people have said that's too much money. I think for a working professional, $4,500 in a world where pro cameras cost $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 makes a lot of sense. I think it's actually at a pretty good price point. If you think about the functionality of something like the A7 R2, this camera is much more capable than that camera, and it is at a premium over that, but it's a significantly better camera. The Sony A9 will be available starting in May. We'll have a full review up by then. Next week, we'll be able to post sample images from the camera. We'll have the link to those images in the YouTube notes when they're available. If you'd like more information about the Sony A9, you can check that out at sonyalphauniverse.com. If you want some more information about Digital Photo Pro or any of the things that we do at the magazine, check us out at digitalphotopro.com. And as always, you can subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much for watching.